Visionary.
Create.
She.
Digital. Hello.
She says.
Listen.
My background isn't in sport at all. I'm a campaigner, which is a form of marketing, and had no interest in sport, frankly. Like many women, I saw it as a sort of cultural space over there. Two older brothers who played football. I was never good enough. School PE was pretty rubbish, so I had nothing to do with sport. I used to dance, that was my thing. But as a campaigner, largely around gender issues, I was approached to get involved with the charity, and I just thought quite quickly, actually this is fascinating. Sport is still one of those bits of society that is so profoundly gendered in a way that many bits of society just aren't. You know, gender changes all the time, but and I've been there 6 years, and it has been really, really interesting and fascinating. And of course the summer has given us a kind of huge opportunity that we feel like, God, you know, we've really got to make the most of this. There are so many different aspects to the issues, from elite women's sport through to the reasons why girls still grow up so inactive. But I brought this very short piece of advertising for the charity, which kind of sets out, I think, the key issues and statistics. So if I show this first, and then I'll try and give a quick canter through some of what I think are the current challenges, and maybe comment on some of the things that Colin's raised as well.
Over 80% of women do too little exercise to benefit their health. Young women leave school half as active as young men.
PE at school, well, where do I start?
We were made to wear these terrible PE kits, including blue pants.
Big grey granny knickers.
You have to wear little skirts and little socks, and you'd be outside and like you get all the boys playing on the field and they'd see you in your little skirt and be like, oh.
The coverage of women's sports isn't very much, is it?
I never see it. You know, it's football, cricket, guys.
John Terry.
Usain Bolt.
Johnny Wilkinson.
I love Tommy Sorensen.
I'm trying to think of women, and I can't.
My women's icons aren't really sports personalities.
I admire Beyonce.
I do like Cheryl Cole.
Cheryl Cole.
Oh yeah, Cheryl Cole. I like Cheryl Cole. If there were more women playing sports, then it probably encouraged me to play more sports.
Lots of girls and women think that if you're going to do sport, it's going to bulk you up, it's going to make you bigger.
The perceptions that usually come out tend to be the word butch, aggressive, which sounds awful, but it is what it is.
The guy just said, well, do you do Pilates then? Because I've got muscular arms, and he was basically relating me to Madonna.
You can be sporty and you can be beautiful, and these things are not mutually exclusive.
I was really anxious when I first went into the gym.
Really muscly, bodybuilding, protein shake drinking men.
I don't like the showers. I'm very conscious of verrucas.
Ideally, changing rooms would have showers and cubicles.
Body creams, shampoo.
I think it's really important women getting together and doing exercise.
I need to be part of a group to exercise.
I did aquanatal, and it was called Aqua Chat because we did talk a lot, but we also were getting fit.
It's funner with our friends.
Having someone looking after the baby other than yourself so that you can go off and be fit is not an easy thing to do.
If I arrange to do something, I have to make sure that I'm around for pick-up after school, or that dinner's ready in the evening.
What makes it a lot easier to do sport and for me get to the gym is if there's some good childcare.
It is difficult for young mums. There's going to be money issues, there's going to be time issues, and probably a bit of confidence issues as well.
Exercise is such an important part of people's lives. It makes you happy, it improves your fitness, your health.
My dream is to get into the Olympics for running. I'd love to be a pro skater.
I like to feel good and I like to try and stay in shape.
We're ready. Are you?
The charity actually has been around for nearly 30 years, and it used to be called the Women's Sports Foundation, and it was about really challenging inequalities in the sports sector. And when I joined the organisation, we just won the Olympic bid, but also this huge public health debate about inactivity and so on was huge and ascendant. So it felt like tactically it was quite important to take advantage of the public health agenda. But I guess the other thing that I felt was important was to take it on the chin that so many women feel so ambivalent, if not outright negative, about sport, and that the organisation, if it was going to credibly be a women's organisation, should reflect more honestly the spectrum of women's views. And so we relaunched and rebranded the organisation as the Women's Sport and Fitness Foundation, and gave it this much wider remit of creating a nation of active women, which I still think was the right thing to do. And sometimes it's quite difficult because it means we try and put our arms around sport and fitness, and actually those two sectors are completely different, and women tend to have a completely different relationship to them. I'll talk a bit more about sport as a sector and as a culture, although I do think the summer has helped immeasurably to shift that, and the fact that we have had cultural commentators, fashion editors, women and men who don't normally write about sport, writing about women's sport and women athletes, and saying how important it is that we really celebrate these women as role models and as positive role models, feels like a sort of the beginning of a bit of a cultural shift, that female sportswomen, who sometimes are sort of viewed as emigres from the female sex, they're not quite men, but they're not women either. It feels like actually we've all got our heads around the fact that yes, they are women, they're very strong, some of them are very aggressive, you know, they box, they fight, but they're women and they're brilliant. And we did a quick poll actually after the main Olympics, before the Paralympics, testing public support for what we do. And the one that I thought was most encouraging was that 81% of the public think that sportswomen are better role models than celebrities for girls, and that felt like it was very exciting. One thing to say up front though, and it's something that we're always very conscious of, is if you're working as an organisation, or anyone who's working on behalf of women, is to sort of recognise that women are not all the same. And one of the most interesting things about women today is that a lot of the evidence shows that women as a group, as half the population, are increasingly diversifying. So we are less similar to each other, and women themselves are making choices that actually take them down to quite different life paths. They associate with different cultures and different interests. So, I guess there's more choice to self-determine the life you want to have. So particularly around family structures, for example, you see a lot of women who go back to what might be seen as an old model of stay-at-home motherhood, and then there are career women who are born out of the sort of do-it-all, and those that are trying to mix it up. But it's a really important caveat to attach that women are not all the same, and as much as possible we try and reflect that in our work, as much as we also try and look at how broadly women and girls are still being influenced at pretty large-scale cultures. We did a piece of work looking at how women's lives have changed over the last 40 years. If you ask anyone why they're not doing more exercise or taking part in sport, they'll say they haven't got time. Time is obviously an important issue in our lives. We're all busier. Sport and fitness comes a long way down our choice of ways to spend our time. It's 17th in our leisure portfolio across all women. But the thing I was most struck by is that over the last 40 years, women are spending on average 2.5 hours a week more time on shopping than they were 40 years ago. Oh. Not Tesco shopping, but cruising around Westfield or wherever, kind of leisure shopping. And of course that's really interesting, because in terms of meeting the recommended guidelines of being active enough, it's not actually very much. You're supposed to do 5 times 30 minutes of exercise a week, and only 1 in 5 of us are achieving that currently. It's not an enormous amount. And you sort of think like half an hour less in the shops, ladies, we'd all get there. So it's really important to kind of, I guess, have that big contextual picture. What else is going on in women's lives and men's lives that make being active so difficult? To come back to us as a charity, we basically work in 3 different ways. So we partly work on the supply side of sport and fitness. So we work with those that deliver sport and fitness and try and tell them more about what's happening in women's and girls' lives, so hopefully they can better deliver their sport and grow that market. And that's the relationship we have with Sport England. So as Colin said, we actually sublet from their offices in Holborn, and they fund us to work mainly with governing bodies of sport, so anyone from the Football Association or the ECB down to much smaller sports like rounders. We work with them. It sounds a bit obvious, but you would be surprised how unconsumer facing the sports sector is. It just has very little real skill and capacity in understanding audiences and marketplaces, And so we, and it's an odd thing in a way, as a charity, provide that sort of market consultancy. And then we've also started working more in schools. We published a report in May about the reasons why so many girls are inactive, called Changing the Game for Girls. So we've started to work in schools as well. So we work on the supply side. 5 minutes, okay. We also work on the demand side, or we aspire to work on the demand side. And actually our sort of meta-analysis of this whole problem is that it is a demand side problem, really. It's a marketing challenge, i.e. we have got to sort of make it more appealing for people, for women in our case, to want to be active. And it is a frustration that millions and millions of pounds is pumped into the supply side of sport. Sport England spends £1 billion every 4 years. 250 million quid a year in the supply side, and nobody's really looking at the marketing side to drive up the demand side. And really, I don't think most people are inactive because of a lack of opportunity. There are plenty of things to do. There is an issue in schools about choice, and every school offering, you know, sufficient choice, but for adults there's plenty of things to do. It's actually wanting to do it, and particularly for women. So the demand side is important. We've been trying to get a big behaviour change initiative off the ground, struggling to find the funding, which is frustrating because, as I say, a lot of money is spent, but it's a conversation ongoing. Interestingly, not from commercial partners who we managed to find quite easily, but our model was a mixture of public-private funding. It's the public side we're struggling with. Sports administration doesn't really still get that the marketing side is important. Thirdly, we work at a policy level, so we do all the lobbying work and host something called the Commission on the Future of Women's Sport, and the Commission has looked in particular at the lack of media profile and commercial sponsorship for women's elite sport, and it was really that work that was particularly profiled over the summer. There's a report called Big Deal which looks at commercial sponsorship, and it is quite eye-watering. Women's only sport gets 0.5% of the sponsorship pie in total, and it's absolutely fascinating to look at why that is. But just briefly to come back to the marketing thing and Colin's presentation, I guess what's particularly important for women, and Colin touched on this, is that aside from the fact that we're all busy and we've got many other distractions on our time, and that applies to men to a large extent as well, there are these very powerful other cultures that are going on that are competing very hard and with much better resource for women's time and energy, and notably, you know, the beauty industry, the dieting industry. And I guess what's so challenging, particularly for girls growing up, is that as much as families, teachers and others might want to keep them active and keep them involved, girls are being pulled very powerfully into a different culture that says it's much more important that you pay attention to how you look. It's much more important to be attractive than active, you might say. And of course those values around what men are valued for and women are valued for go back through millennia. You know, you can go back to sort of you know, kind of Greek statues and see those values of male strength and female sort of decorative passive beauty. They're very, very deep and very entrenched, and on some level it's really hard to start unpicking that and actually give girls a sense that being active and, if necessary, aggressive or sweating or working physically very hard is still feminine. But I have to say, I just think the summer was extraordinary in how that was embraced. Really extraordinary, and I probably feel perhaps more positive than Colin, I'm not sure, but I think there is evidence of a sea change.